Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our NFL 2023-2024 Playoffs Divisional Round prediction. Mouthful there because it is a mouthful of games. Great matchups across the board right here. All four of them, final 8 teams. But before we talk about those 8 teams, just a quick update on the 2 teams of Cal and I's head-to-head pick'em game. For yet another week, Callan puts up more points than I and bridges the gap again. I only got 3 games correct, resulting in 6 points. Callan got 4 games correct, resulting in 8 points, putting us at a total of me with 194 and Callan with 207, bringing his lead back up to 13. But here is my chance again because, as you'll see in a little bit, we picked many of these games differently and they are worth 4 points apiece. So I got a great opportunity here to bridge the gap quite a bit. So let's see if I can do that, starting with the game being played Saturday at 3:30 Central Time with the 4 seed Houston Texans heading to Baltimore to take on the 1 seed Ravens. And we start by disagreeing here. Callan has the Texans. I have the Ravens. I will be completely honest. Earlier today when I first made my picks, I did have the Texans, but then I just sat and I let it fester all day and I ended up switching to the Ravens. I think the Texans absolutely balled out and they showed it by shit stomping the 5 seed Browns, who a lot of people thought were going to opposite way shit stomp the Texans. But CJ Stroud showed up. That whole defense showed up. Nico Collins really cemented himself as a number 1 wide receiver on that team. So many good things going on there in Houston. But they're all just so young. It's not their time yet. And more than anything, it is the Ravens' time. You want to talk about domination. The Ravens have absolutely picked apart almost every team they played, including the NFC 1 seed San Francisco 49ers, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But they have just showed that it is their year. They are on some type of roll. They had the bye week. Texans are going to be coming up from Houston and having to go to Baltimore, who knows what the weather will be like in Baltimore this time of year. It could be a wide range of snow to cold to pouring rain. So we'll have to see what the weather ends up being this Saturday. But nonetheless, the Ravens are just way too good. They have been absolutely killing it all season, even with key injuries to people like Mark Andrews on that offense. And I just got to go with the 1 seed in this one.
Yeah, well, I like the upset here. I like the Texans to win this one because of CJ Stroud. And this is a young man's game, and we're learning that this is a young man's game as the young quarterbacks are taking over. And they're really kind of the end of an era with this being the first playoffs without Brady or Manning since, what was it? I want to say 98?
Jesus, that's crazy.
Without either one, which is, yeah, that's crazy. That's just the whole end of an era thing. So we got these new young quarterbacks in, and I think that the Texans are just too much of a roll and too much momentum rolling in Baltimore. And I think it's going to surprise the Ravens. They're led, but in the defense by their coach, DeMeco Ryans, who has just done a great job coaching that defense. They were last in defense last year, in total defense last year. And this year, they're one of the top units in total defense. And they have really shown it by shutting down the high-powered offense that was the Cleveland Browns last week and limiting Joe Flacco to only 2. Did he throw? No, he only had 1 touchdown. And 2
interceptions,
2 pick sixes.
Both of those being pick sixes.
So those turnovers are key. And when you can force turnovers in the playoffs, you can go pretty far when you get that momentum going. And I just think that with that defense and the way CJ Stroud has been playing, it's going to surprise the Ravens, and the Texans are going to sneak away with one late.
Yeah, pick sixes on back-to-back drives for the Browns. That is a momentum killer, to say the least. But yeah, don't get me wrong. I see this being a very close game and a very competitive Texans team. But you say it's a young man's game, and Lamar Jackson might not be quite a young man anymore, but he still sure plays like it. So I think that he's able to secure the win.
He's very dynamic.
Now moving on to our second game of the Saturday slate, starting at 7:15 Central Time and including the other 1 seed. We have the Green Bay Packers heading over to San Francisco to take on the 49ers. And we disagree again. Callan sticks with his Packers, and I again take the 1 seed with the 49ers. Callan has neither 1 seed going on, and I could see one of the two 1 seeds losing. But I just don't see a world where both 1 seeds get swept out in the divisional round the first time they play. And I think that this offense is going to do what it's done all year, and it's going to just lean on Christian McCaffrey. The only time that the Niners truly just straight up got dominated this year was by the Baltimore Ravens, and that was on the back of 4 Brock Purdy interceptions. So how do you make sure that that doesn't happen in win or go home playoff scenarios? You just only feed the running back and far and away the best player on your team, and in my opinion, far and away the best player in the entire league. I see a high dose of Christian McCaffrey, especially against this Packers defense, who has very much struggled against the run on and off all season, more on struggling than off struggling. But I see Christian McCaffrey just absolutely tearing them apart. I could see maybe Jordan Love doing his back foot bullshit magic and throwing things up and getting completions out of thin air. But it can't last. It can't last. Something's got to give eventually. They've gone against some pretty bad defenses, and I thought that's all it was. But then they go against a pretty good ball hawking defense in the Cowboys, and it works even almost better than it did against the worser defense like the Vikings and the Bears that they faced towards the end of the year. So it's got to give eventually. It's going to pop like an absolute air balloon once it happens, in my opinion. Is it this game? Who knows? I think it is, but we'll see. If it doesn't pop, the Packers give them a run for their money. But even with Jordan Love balling out, I just don't think that they can keep up with the 1 seed.
I disagree. I think that they go in there, and for the same reason they surprise the 49ers, the same reason that the Texans surprise the Ravens, is that these two teams are coming off of over 2 and 3 weeks of rest without playing any football. Whereas these other two teams are coming in with high momentum after high scoring games and big wins, for them being on the big stage. And I think for the Packers especially, it's Jordan Love's time. It's time for him to show that he belongs as one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. He's over the past 9 games, he's had 20 touchdowns and 1 interception. So like you said, when that bubble breaks, it probably will break. But I think that he's just on too much of a roll right now. And it's funny, you talked last week about history repeating itself. Well, in the baseball playoffs this year, the 2 final teams in the World Series were a wild card and the 3rd division winner.
Really?
Yep. So
interesting.
So it was not the top teams. The top teams were eliminated early in the playoffs.
So I see it
happening in the NFL this year because some of those sports just seem to follow each other. It's funny. I've just been watching too many different sports for too long, and there's just too many connections that are those too odd like that. But I believe not only because of that, but I do believe in this Packers team. That defense has really turned it around since the players and coaches meeting after the Panthers game when they allowed Bryce Young to have a game of the week. So he got an NFC honor for that week against the Packers. So it was his best game of the year. So good for Bryce Young. But ever since that game, the Packers defense has been very turnover prone. And we got 2 more big interceptions on Dak Prescott last week, including 1 pick six by Darnell Savage. And I think that's the key again this week is getting turnovers with Brock Purdy. When you can put pressure on him and force him into throwing the ball when he does not want to, he can really throw it into traffic and throw into turnovers. I've seen it against the Vikings with Danielle Hunter and him getting pressure on Purdy. And I think he threw 3 interceptions that game, if I'm not mistaken, against the Vikings.
Yeah.
So I know that Purdy can be beaten, and I think we're going to have a big game from not only Rashawn Gary, but Lucas Van Ness. Look for him to have a big game against Brock Purdy.
Yeah, always bring it back around to history repeating itself. Seems to be our new motto on this show. But the 3 losses this year for the San Francisco 49ers that Purdy started in, were the Browns, which he threw at least 2, if not maybe a third interception, the Vikings, which he threw at least 2, if maybe not a third interception, and the aforementioned Ravens, in which he threw 4 interceptions. So it's a pretty clear pattern right there when the Niners lose, and it's when that they don't just fully rely on Christian McCaffrey, which usually you say you can't do that, but with a guy like Christian McCaffrey, it might be your only chance sometimes. It's crazy.
If the Niners win it, it's because Christian McCaffrey has taken over the game and he has won it by himself. I see that being the only way the Niners win against this team. So if we hold him under 200 total yards, I see us walking away with a victory.
He's one of the only guy that might do it to you. He really is. So now moving on to the Sunday slate and the other NFC game, we have the 4-seed Tampa Bay Buccaneers heading to the 3-seed Detroit Lions, played on 2 o'clock Central on Sunday. And we disagree again. Callan has the 4-seed Bucks. I have the 3-seed Lions. Now, I touched on it a little bit last week, but I really did think that the Rams were sneaky, but maybe one of the best teams in this playoffs. They were coming in on a hot streak. They had all the players on offense. They were slacking on defense, but they had a very good defensive coordinator and a well-coached defense that was stepping up with a lot of like second string and young players. And of course had one of the greatest to ever do it, Aaron Donald. So the Rams had a lot going for them. And I thought that they were going to beat the Lions. I thought they were going to move on. But the Lions were able to hold on. They played a really solid game, a really smart game, and were able to get a 1-point win at home. I kind of wanted to pick the Bucks here, but the Lions just got too much respect from me for beating the Rams because the Rams were my sneaky Super Bowl appearance really at the end of the day. And then they got outed round 1. But when the team that you think is going to win gets beat, you jump to the team who beat them because that's probably who you see going further. So I see this one being a really close one, borderline coin flip, but mostly for that reason and the fact that I think that the Bucks just don't have the firepower to sustain a success and continue to play at this consistent and good level. I have the Lions walking away with a win in this one.
Yeah, I disagree here. I like the Buccaneers in this one, in this old school NFC Central matchup back from the early 90s, the old NFC Central. So Barry Sanders played the Buccaneers a lot. So, but I digress. Talking about this game, I like the Buccaneers in this one because of Baker Mayfield and his tear that he has been on ever since the playoffs started. And he is the first Buccaneers quarterback to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in a postseason game, beating out Tom Brady, who was not able to do that for the Buccaneers. Now, obviously, Brady only played for a few years for the Bucs, but still, for Baker to do it in his first year, that's very impressive. And I think that defense has turned it around. Todd Bowles is, one of the better defensive play callers in the NFL, and he's one of the veteran play callers, and I think he's really well suited for this playoff run for the Buccaneers defense. And I think that the Buccaneers do have the firepower, at least through the air, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin really showing up lately, and especially Mike Evans. And they still have Rachaad White in the backfield, who has played solidly, maybe not superstar level, but he's definitely done his job and made the defense at least honest and respect the running game of the Buccaneers.
Yeah, certainly. I really like what Rachaad White's been able to do because he wasn't put in the best situation to say the least, but he certainly made the most of what he was given. The Bucks did look really good against the Eagles last week, but I think that was more the Eagles looking sloppy than the Bucks looking good. So it'll be interesting to see if they go against a team like the Lions, who more than likely aren't going to play as sloppy as the Eagles did, if they can hold up in that situation.
If not for a couple drops, that would have been an even higher score for the Buccaneers.
I agree. A couple of huge drops by Mike Evans, who you mentioned, and that won't happen again. He's one of those guys that doesn't.
No, if he lets that happen again, the Lions are going to win. They can't let any mistakes happen for the Bucks.
Certainly. Now, finally, we have the final game of our divisional round, which will be played on Sunday at 5:30 Central Time. Weird start time for those Sunday games, but when you only have 2 of them, you can space them out. We have an AFC rival playoff rivalry more than anything, I guess. Yeah. But rematch here. We have the Kansas City Chiefs heading to Buffalo to take on the Bills. And we end by agreeing on this one. We almost sweeped on the disagrees, but we do agree at the end here. This is, I believe, the first time in the playoffs this has been played in Buffalo. I believe all 3 other times that Mahomes has won, they have all been in Kansas City.
Yep.
So that's an interesting little dynamic there.
In fact, it is Mahomes' first ever road playoff game that's not a Super Bowl.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting. So that's a big one because, the Chiefs certainly didn't look bad by any means against the Dolphins, but the situation they were in, they had the weather on their side, they had the home field advantage on their side.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they should have dominated even more than they did against the Dolphins because the Dolphins just didn't really show up to play in that game, and the Chiefs didn't destroy them, but they definitely showed up to play in that game. If they make that look like a little more of a domination game, I do consider going the Chiefs here. But the Bills just looked good. Now, the same thing can be said for their side, so it sounds a little hypocritical. I think that they could have done much better against the Steelers team without TJ Watt and as Mason Rudolph as their starter, who held it close the whole time. But nonetheless, these Bills are just relentless. The way that they have went on a tear this final half of the season. Around week 14, I think I heard it was on the broadcast, they had a 5% chance to make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the end of week 17 rather, of course, week 18 rather, they were the 2 seed in the AFC, which is just absolutely crazy. So they have just been doing something right here as of late. There's so much anticipation built up around this game.
Mm-hmm.
I think Josh Allen does what Josh Allen does. He comes out and plays some hero ball. They were able to beat the Chiefs earlier this year on that very controversial ending. And in my opinion, I still think Patrick Mahomes very disrespectfully greeted Josh Allen in that handshake, talking about how bad the game was and how they should have won pretty much.
Oh, yeah, that was that game.
I think that Josh Allen kind of remembers that, and he was like, want to watch me beat you without a controversial call? Here we go. I'm going to do it right here, right now. I'm going to do it in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I see the Bills winning this one, not by a blowout, but handily, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like the Bills in this one pretty well too. And I think that the Chiefs offense just isn't going to be in sync enough to dominate like they have in the past. Their wide receivers are one of the, lower ranked units in the NFL, and they have led the league in drops, I'm pretty sure. So,
they have to. Yeah.
So, I just don't think that they're going to be able to put up enough points to keep up with this Buffalo offense, who knows that from the past experiences that they think they're going to have to score a lot of points against these Chiefs. They're used to shootouts with the Chiefs. And especially trying to get revenge after the 13-second comeback. And I think this is their chance to really do it and really stick it to the Chiefs and really end their repeat chances.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the weather affects the game in Buffalo. Last week, of course, they had to postpone the game, move it from Saturday to Monday. So that was certainly an interesting little tidbit added in there. It was actually Sunday to Monday now I think about it more.
It was.
But they still had to postpone it nonetheless. But it'll be weird to see how weather affects it. And it's got to be a weird situation for the Chiefs. I mean, they have a lot of people they do have a lot of rotation, especially in that receiver room. But outside of the receiver room, they have a lot of guys who have been there each and every playoff run they've had. Mm-hmm. So when you've only ever played at home in the playoffs and then now you're facing a very good team in bad weather on the road, it is a whole new world, a whole new dynamic. So it'll really have to come down to how the Chiefs face that at the end of the day. Every time I count the Chiefs out, it seems like every time anybody counts the Chiefs out is when they're at their best. They come out and show up. So we'll see.
One player for the Chiefs that I was impressed with last week was Rashee Rice, who showed that he is possibly their number one receiver. Even though he's a rookie, he was able to get at least a touchdown and showed that he was able to secure some catches. So if he shows that he can, really be that number one, expect a big game from Rashee Rice if the Chiefs do expect to upset the Bills.
I'm expecting a big game by Isaiah Pacheco. They would not feed him. He was getting like 10, 15 yards a run, it seemed like, and they just refused to hand it to him sometimes. It was mind-blowing, but we'll see if they change their tune for this game. But that was our NFL divisional round predictions. Thank you all so much for watching, and make sure to stay tuned in until next week when we do our NFC and AFC championship game predictions. But until then, don't forget
To eat the W.